Are you recording the voice? I mean, well, you are, but using that mic.
Yes, using that mic.
You want an extension?
I think so.
So we're still getting this thing all set up, so bear with us. I'm actually gonna go get some coffee. Here we are, and we're going to talk about a current issue, but it might actually be a perennial issue. And one of the reasons is because we thought it would be really nice to start our own talk channel. And one of the things that we looked at was Patreon. You know, how can you monetize it and do it in a way that's non-intrusive, make it so that people who like to donate can donate, yeah. And Patreon looked like a really good model. We were impressed with other people who were using it. And now there's currently a controversy with Patreon because they're doing some censorship that the Patreon community doesn't agree with, or at least some of the more vocal and high profile and high earning people on Patreon. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of the users. So one thing that's driven a lot of feedback from content creators seems to have been a lot of users dropping the service. And I just watched a video by a guy recently.
Oh, right.
The first he heard about this was because his patrons were leaving the service.
So it's not just that the actual providers are trying to boycott Patreon. They've just decided the platform is flawed and they need to get away from it. Though one of the things we were talking about was censorship and getting along with people and understanding. One of the themes that I've seen about getting to know people or talking with people is to understand alternative viewpoints as well as you understand your own. And in fact, to understand it better what you think before I tell you what I think. Well, I'm not sure that I'm that good at that, but I'm at least aspired to doing so. So then,
and then the other thing about it though too is, and something we've talked about is the need to have, multiple revenue streams potentially for creators. And so it may be that even though some people don't want to be associated with Patreon, it might make sense, one, to be part of that conversation, part of that community of folks if you want to actually see any change within that community. But two, for content creators, even if you're worried about some of your income stream being at risk because of the trust and safety committee at Patreon, the best way to deal with that is not to necessarily eliminate Patreon as a revenue source, but to diversify your revenue sources and continue engaging with that community versus sort of censoring them as your response?
Yeah, and isn't that actually a good financial advice anyway, is to diversify whatever your income is, your stocks, your day job, or whatever it is. If you've only got one income stream, like I do consulting, if that's the only thing I've got, then if suddenly I'm hospitalized or something, then I've got zero income stream, unless, of course, I've diversified a little bit by at least having insurance or something like that. But even in those situations, if I have multiple income streams so that my physical ability to do certain things is handicapped for whatever reason, I still have income coming in. So that's I think that's true even with Patreon, that if you're all in on Patreon, you've maybe made a mistake where you should maybe have other ways for people to compensate you, maybe Patreon-like, maybe different model completely. So
and it doesn't seem to currently be an alternative. So there's no real main competitor to Patreon. You can use PayPal, you can use Subscribestar or some of these other services, but nobody's really able to take on Patreon right now. And even Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin have pretty much said it's still in the works.
Yeah, they're working on another alternative, and we're excited to see what that is. However, one of the things that one wonders about is, even though all these people are leaving Patreon, are they so upset at Patreon that if you don't leave Patreon, they still won't support you?
On any platform.
Well, now that says to me that they're no different than the very thing they're boycotting, because isn't that what Patreon did? They said that even though you've behaved on our platform and we don't like what we heard you say, and so boom, we booted you off without any recourse, without any
process.
Well, without any due process, without any appeals process, without, you know, all that sort of thing. But again, let's say you've decided, since you signed a contract or whatever, that you know, okay, I guess I put myself in submission to you. Again, back to okay, so Patreon boots somebody off, and I decide not to boycott. That means that because you're going to boycott me because I'm not boycotting. That gets into, I went to a theology class once, and they talked about first, second, and third separationists. Now, I don't pretend to understand all of that, but the layman's understanding of that is say Billy Graham, bless his soul, you know, he's passed on, but let's say you like Billy, but you don't like other people. Maybe you don't like you know, the not see, now I'm stalling because I don't want to. I'm going to edit this out.
Joel Osteen?
Well, yeah, sure. There you go. I was trying to come up with a name for somebody, you know, trying not to be too controversial, but sure, you don't like Joel, but you love Billy. So then what happens is because Billy had a conversation with Joel, you decide that even though you like Billy, you so dislike Joel, which, by the way, I don't know that that's necessarily a good example. But there, you know, there's some people that don't like him, some people that like him. And so you decide, oh, I like Billy, I don't like Joel. So Billy talked to Joel, I'm not even going to do anything with Billy anymore. So now you're not just a first degree separationist, which says I'm not going to have anything to do with Joel. I'm a second degree separationist, which means I'm not going to have anything to do with anybody who has anything to do with Joel. And third degree, pretty much, I'm not even sure if you can talk to anybody outside the house. So,
and even
you know, that kind of thing. So again, it's that kind of thing with the whole Patreon controversy. How dedicated are you to boycotting them? Are you so dedicated that you're offended by us simply by staying affiliated with them?
Well, and actually it's even worse for us because we're not currently affiliated with Patreon. So maybe if we were already part of Patreon before all of this debacle, you wouldn't have an issue with us. But do you have an issue with us joining Patreon
right
now that all this has happened?
Say well, you know, like we're no smarter than Jordan Peterson, I wouldn't think. Now, there may be some things that I think differently than him. It doesn't mean I'm smarter. It also doesn't mean I'm wrong. But nonetheless, sorry,
I like that.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm not one of those guys with the inflated IQ thing. I have absolutely no idea what it is, but I'm hoping it's somewhere near average. Anyway,
I'm hoping it's somewhere
well, above average. Above average. Yes,
who was it?
He's no longer in favor, but yes, where all the children are above average. Anyway, Garrison Keeler. Yeah. He's
great Minnesota.
Currently now, just simply by mentioning him, you've second degree separate. What, you miserable bum? Anyway, you've mentioned his name.
What did he? Did he say something about the?
Oh, he's been picked up in the Me Too movement and all of that. He's currently in disfavor.
I didn't even know.
Oh no, he's mistreated some people of the opposite gender. Anyway,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So anyway, well, and I don't know that he had allegedly. I don't know whether or not. All I know is that suddenly he was gone, and that was the Fuhrer. And so it's kind of like this whole Patreon thing. So like, so just mentioning.
No, speaking of Fuhrer, that's a word we might want to avoid using.
Oh yeah, that's
you
right.
Remember,
should not be in our vocabulary.
Peterson was doing an interview with some comedian, and he made the comment that there was some furor about something, and the guy said,
don't say
"Are you sure that being accused of being a Nazi that's a word you should be throwing around?"
Well, see, now you've just went one step further and used the word that will.
I used the N word.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a different discussion altogether.
We're not going to go there.
We might. But anyway, there are certain things and that's the other thing about the sensitivity. So we would like to be hyperbole for hyperbole's sake. And the thing is we should be able to, sort of go out there a little bit and discover, see what's going on, get some feedback, and maybe learn and improve who we are and what we're saying. But if you can't even open your mouth about stuff that you haven't figured out,
then how are people supposed to beat you up about the things you're supposed to change?
Well, or how are you supposed to know this stuff? You mean I'm supposed to just magically, mystically know what's right and wrong? Now, it's also true that...
well, isn't that the issue with Mr. Hart?
No, are you picking up yet another person? Yes, in fact, Kevin Hart. What? Okay, so back when nobody cared, or maybe they did care enough, they gave him a little bit of grief for a joke he made, and so he apologized for it at the time and moved on. Years later, they invite him, and then, of course, then the people go and vet him after the fact because it requires the entire internet to go after every last minute he's ever said. And then somebody says, life. Yes, and somebody says, oh, here's something he said which is inappropriate, and it's kind of like, and because of the pushback, he's decided that he's not gonna, speak at an important event, and we think that's wrong. We think that it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, he dealt with it at the time, and that's not who he is. And so it's also back to the whole reason why the whole Patreon furor that we understand is that somebody has said something in a hyperbolic way. It's a matter of speech to kind of push a little bit the boundaries in order to get you to pay attention and realize what you're doing.
Maybe because think about things.
Yeah, and the guy, we certainly don't agree with him. In fact, a lot of the people standing up for him don't agree with him. But and it's not even a case where I'm willing to die over your right to speak. It's just sort of like, wait a minute. You just got run over by a train, and I might be the next one, or maybe other people. And so I think it's appropriate to respond, but still, it's kind of like the whole thing is ridiculous. They're tightening up things so much that anybody that it's impossible to use language in polite company that's anything except totally watered down, which means nothing meaningful is going to be said. And then at the same time, as soon as you start mentioning something, I mean, during the last election, I'd bring up some politics once in a while, and people would all start running for the door, especially because I've got no
clutching
sense
their pearls, maybe.
Yeah, worse than that. It's sort of, and it didn't matter it didn't matter whether you're red or blue or white in the middle somewhere. Oh, sorry, black in the middle, blue in the middle, green in the middle. So anyway, again,
because all of us were
what is the proper way to describe someone's political?
I don't think green's in the middle. They're somewhat on the left, I would say.
No, well, and in Ireland, it's green on the left or on the right because it's green and orange.
Oh, well, there's
Right. So it's all context driven. And so this is one of the things, people who grew up thinking one way, or maybe not even smart enough, or never even really considered the stupidity that they've had. And I'm sure we've all got some of that. And then you come along, and then you get pushback, and you say, no, wait a minute. And especially when it's somebody you care about and respect, and you say, wait a minute, maybe I should reconsider. And so I do think
no.
yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of where we're coming from. We think we should be able to say a few things that are out there in order to figure out whether we know what we're talking about or not,
and drive the conversation in a direction that actually leads to somewhere constructive.
Right. Now, here's the deal. Something that's true when spoken is not always truth. And that's part of the problem with not just political correctness and, coloring within the lines and not saying things to offend other people or whatever, or however you want to call it. Political correctness is bundled up with dynamite and other things.
And actually, there's research supposedly that says it means different things to different people.
Oh, absolutely. So anyway, but nonetheless, that whole idea that there are things that are okay to say, not okay to say, depending upon and
I would say that is true. There are things that aren't okay to say in certain contexts. Someone's just lost a loved one. There are certain things that are just not okay to say.
Right. Right.
But that doesn't mean that it should be illegal for you to say it. It's just wrong for you to say it.
Right. And in fact, most humor is pushing the boundaries.
Gallows humor.
Well, not just gallows humor, any humor. If they haven't somehow pushed a boundary, however minimal, and children do it too, but maybe they're only pushing the English language boundary and saying things goofy, because they rhyme.
I'm going to bury you.
Yeah, from your daughter. Yeah.
Daughter.
Yeah.
Young
yeah.
daughter.
But did she mean Barry?
We don't even yet know.
Anyway,
she was holding a toy gun at the time, so
yeah. So you've already people who are anti-NRA are already upset with you. So anyway, nonetheless, personally, I won't have a firearm in the house, but unless it's under lock and key because one of my relatives has
laser
tag. Right. I don't know. Should we?
You can blame your other son.
Yeah, he gave it to her. So so anyway, there are things that are out of bounds, but at the same time, you should be able to push the boundaries a little bit in order to discover what the truth is, because that's how we do it. There's sort of a give and a take and a challenging each other. And if we're not even allowed to say what I think, how am I ever going to reconsider what I believed? And I've actually had older people ask me questions, and they don't consider themselves prejudiced, but then they'll say things that are sort of like, shh, don't use those words. And it's sort of like, what do you mean don't use those words? And they don't get it yet. Now, at the same time, there are people that understand completely that they're using loaded vocabulary, and they're doing it in a way so that they can speak out in the open about how they want to be prejudiced. They're saying things with that underlying signal, and I think that's some of what's gone on.
Dog whistling, I believe, or
dog whistling,
or dog whistle. Isn't that the term? Dog whistle?
Cat call?
Well, that's a different.
What's dog whistle?
When you do that, when you use a term with the intent of it being interpreted by a certain community in a particular way, because only certain people,
see, I didn't even know this.
Let's say only dogs can hear the dog whistle and humans don't. And so all of us are going, well, they just said this string of words, and they go, well, but that means something to this community.
Okay. Well, and I think it's the same thing. There are people in members of communities that are sensitive to stuff and not sensitive to stuff that, as two white guys, we don't get. We just don't get. But we try. Now, here's the thing. There are people who pretend not to get it and know better. And some of them have gotten into trouble. But here's the thing. There are people that don't get it. And they need to talk it through to get it. And there are some people that it takes a couple of rounds to get it. And comedians also we'll talk about that. I've actually been watching several comedians, and then they'll say something, and there's only a couple of chuckles in the audience, and they'll go, I'll notice, I've heard at least 3 different comedians say, and you can explain that to your neighbor. I've heard that by 3 different guys, and I think 1 gal, and yeah, so like it's yeah, you didn't get the joke, and you know, I still remember in high school you're sitting there, and there was 1 gal in the class where there'd be a little bit, you know, something would happen, everybody would laugh, and then there'd be a little bit of a silence. Why was it always her? Now, it could have been a guy in another class, I don't know, but it was this 1 gal, and then all of a sudden she would go, "Oh, I get it." And then we would laugh again, right? So,
well, it's even better than that. I had a gal in high school who I knew. She would say the craziest things that were hilarious on all kinds of levels, and she at least pretended not to understand
what she had said,
any of this and how any of
but
this
she
is
might
so
have been
funny.
doing it on purpose.
And I think she was doing it on purpose, but she got everybody, you know, rolling on the floor laughing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I have a friend who's told me that sometimes when I'm talking, he starts leaning forward. He really wants to hear what I'm saying because it's going to be just profound. He just thinks I'm just about to come out with something important. And then what it is just, I believe the word he used was twisted. Anyway, so hyperbole is who we are, and a little twisted in sort of a off into space kind of a way. So anyway, so that's kind of what we're talking about. But well, here's a question we have. Should we join Patreon? And would you be so offended that you wouldn't support us on any other platform? Or should we not join Patreon?
Let us know.
Yeah. So so you can help us with that disaster, and then I'll have to clean up this.
Well, we'll catch you next time. I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we can actually.
Do you want to clean that?
Or you can actually stop that and it'll save it.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
It's not that big a.
That was actually. It's almost like you planned that.
Yeah, like that gal.
All right.